You can see here I've got a project with quite a number of different spectra in it, and I've organised them into different spectrum groups. So I've got some spectra that are just of the apoprotein, I've got some that belong to a mutant, then I've done a titration, and I've also got some dynamics data. Now by default you can see all I've got is one chemical shift list, and all of these spectra are associated with that chemical shift list. Now be aware that in a single chemical shift list, the chemical shifts are averaged across all the spectra. So that means my chemical shifts from my mutant and from my wild-type protein are going to be muddled together and averaged. That's obviously not something we want. Similarly with titration, the chemical shifts change in each single spectrum, so we don't want them to be averaged across all of them. For a single spectrum, you can always have a look and see which chemical shift list it belongs to by double-clicking on it and then going to the General tab and seeing here chemical shift list, and you can change which one it's in. You can also place it into a new chemical shift list. The only problem with doing that is that it simply gives it this rather random name, my chemical shift list. If you double-click on there, you can always change that. So here we could say we want it to be this mutant name, and we can always double click or drag other spectra to be included as well, and then save, and we're done. An alternative way to do this, I'm just going to undo things, is to use a macro. So if you go to macro, run CcpN macros, and then we've got move spectrum group spectra into new chemical shift lists. And here I could just select my mutant spectrum group and say I want to put all of these into a new chemical shift list, and it'll suggest a hopefully sensible name based on the spectrum group. So I can just do that and it just goes in one. This is particularly useful when you come to the titration, because as I said earlier, you basically want each spectrum to be in a separate chemical shift list. So again, we can go to macro, run CcpN macros, and move spectrum group spectra, and this time we want to select the DNA titration and we want to move them into separate new chemical shift lists. So you can see it's done that, and it will just set the names based on the names of the spectra. Finally, just to show you the other option contained in the macro, one thing you might consider doing is having a chemical shift list which you just have as a bit of a dumping ground for those spectra for which you're actually not interested in the chemical shifts, but you don't want them to contribute towards your chemical shift averages. So I might have something just called random or rubbish or dumping ground or what have you. The kinds of spectra you might want to put in there would be, for instance, your dynamics data. You're not interested in the chemical shifts for these, simply in the intensities. So you could go to the macro again, and this time you could say I want to put them into an existing chemical shift list. Select random, and you can see they've been moved in there. It's worth being aware that you can't delete a chemical shift list while it still has spectra associated with it, because in that case we would be randomly moving your chemical shift lists elsewhere. You might not be aware of that, and that's potentially a bit dangerous. So first of all, move them elsewhere. If you move them out of a chemical shift list, they will automatically just go into the top one, so in this case the default one, so you can see these dynamics data have been added in here, and then this time I can delete my chemical shift list. Obviously you always have to have at least one chemical shift list in your project, so you can't delete your final chemical shift list, whichever that is. If you want some more detailed information about the way in which the program handles chemical shifts, then have a look at our chemical shifts webpage and video.